Hey everyone, rudyxx here to talk about another RPGalooza game, Tales of Zestiria. For those of you that don't know, RPGalooza is a project I started involving playing through a huge list of RPG titles, ranging from Western style to Japanese. And while I'm not a huge RPG connoisseur, I do like to dabble in them every now and then, so hopefully I can provide for you all a more modern day gamer's look at my experiences with them. So with that out of the way, on to Tales of Zestiria. Leading up to this game, I had heard a lot of good things about Tales of Zestiria, but never really heard that much about Zestiria, other than knowing that the two games were linked in some ways. I figured I should play through it first, since that's how the game's released, but going into it, I honestly wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. So I tried it out for roughly around 7-ish hours before I had just had enough. Everything about it was just completely insufferable. I'm actually not sure if I've ever played a video game that just didn't vibe with me as much as this one did. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the game for the people this game was intended for, but I am so far from the type of person this game was aimed at that the experience was just too much for me. So originally, I quit this game about 7 or so hours into it and put off playing Zestiria for a long time. Alright, so fast forward a few years to when I actually did decide to just skip Zestiria and play Zestiria instead, and about halfway through Zestiria, I basically got really interested in seeing what exactly was drawn from Zestiria. So for the RPGalooza project, I am starting my review of this game with this specific instance of my playthrough of the game, and not my original one. I went into this game knowing I was going to hate everything about it, so I decided to do a few things that I knew would drastically improve my experience with it overall. For starters, I absolutely hated how the game handled things like equipment and skills, so my plan was to just overlevel to compensate for it, and just buy whatever made me the strongest. So for the most part, I didn't really dabble with the horribly convoluted system they had for coming up with bonuses for equipping certain equipment with certain abilities and so forth. Like, for people that are really into that, this system is probably great. For me, however, it was overly complicated, and I would rather have just gone out for an hour and fought monsters than spend 20 minutes adjusting all of my equipment anytime I got something new, just so I have the proper feng shui or whatever for my equipment to give me the most benefit. Secondly, I absolutely abhorred the combat and how awkward it felt, so I went through the entire game with everyone set to auto. So for the most part, my opinion on the gameplay absolutely is invalidated, because I fought maybe 3 encounters the entire game myself, rather than letting the AI take over. Which, at the very least, I will say that the AI is pretty heckin' good at the game, because I went into this thinking I was going to have to grind my ass off, but unfortunately, despite playing on normal mode, the AI never really had a hard time. There was definitely a few fights where I had to manually use a few items to tweak some of the abilities, and there's a few fights that have certain gimmicks that I had to control in order to actually do the gimmick. But for the most part, the AI did a fantastic job. Lastly, I went into this game fully just wanting to focus on the story and nothing else, which unfortunately I hated tremendously. With the exception of a couple of characters, I could not stand anything anyone said, and it was just a constant cringe fest for most of the game. The main character, Saray, especially, got on my nerves. I really don't like exploring, and I most definitely am not into searching ruins for random things. Every single conversation involving Saray was so horribly cringy that I actually felt physical pain on several occasions with how horribly written everything was for me. Not to mention that most of the dialogue sounded like it was written by someone's dad that thinks they are hip with the kids, but most definitely has no idea what's cool, and so it was just a constant struggle for me to want to keep going. I pressed on and just did what I could, but when I reached a point in the story where the conditions for advancing were go explore until you've explored everything, they seriously almost lost me. At this point, I looked up a guide to finish the game out, but it was incredibly difficult for me to willingly want to continue, and was totally not worth it in the long run. For RPGalooza, I gave this game a 1 out of 10, but honestly, the only reason I'm giving it any points is because Rose is essentially what kept me going, and I really loved her character. There was so many times in the story where Saray would be talking, and I would say something about the situation, and then Rose literally just repeated the same thing back. Like, if she hadn't been there, then I probably would have given up on this game, because otherwise, it was just suffering for me the entire time. And like I mentioned before, this game is probably perfect for whoever the game was developed for. It's got a lot of features that I know people really like, but this game managed to combine everything I hate in a video game all together, and so for me, it was nothing but a miserable experience. So if you're into things like exploring and mining and maxing stuff, this game is probably like a 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 or something for you. But for me, it was definitely one of the worst games I've ever played. Anyways, that's all I've got to say about Tales of Zestiria. If you enjoyed this video, despite my feelings towards Tales of Zestiria, and would like to look forward to many more RPG reviews in the future, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're interested in seeing me actually play through a variety of games in real time, make sure you follow my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/rudyxx. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.